watch out for the Beast of London Road. John thought this was all a joke. That is until when one night, the beast stepped out of a dark woods onto a road not 15 feet away from him. Tonight, John's going to share all the details of that encounter, as well as others he had. John, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure, man. I'm excited to get on here for a while.
For starters, growing up, what was the first occurrence you know of in your area that could possibly be attributed to Dogman activity?
Really, when I was younger, I mean, they're always told, like, not to go out after dark, you know, stuff like that, and stuff about the boogeyman, and stuff to basically kind of scare kids into, you know, not going too far into the woods. The first thing I can really say definitively about it was where I grew up at. There's a road called London Road, and there were always talk around when I went to school about the thing on London Road, and nobody really could tell what it was. All it was a dark shape that would chase your car. We would always go on that road and be like, yeah, whatever, you know, blah, 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 blah. You know, thinking it was all just a joke, kind of like an urban legend type thing, like Bloody Mary or, you know, the Crybaby Bridge, stuff like that. There was a couple of times where we would be driving, or we'd drive like real slow just to kind of push our luck a little bit if there was something, where something actually, we could see something like run up behind the car, and it would of course scare us every time. We'd freak out and, you know, hit the gas and go as fast as we could. But the thing is, we would be going about 35, or we would, you know, be going 35 normally, but then we'd kick up the speed to about 50 or 60 or faster than that, and it was still keeping pace with us. So we couldn't really explain that. And in that same area, though, that's where one of our friends had a horse farm, and they had, you know, 5 or 6 horses, like all the time. One of my friends, her favorite one actually had passed away, had died, and this happened on a Friday, and they were burying it, and we dropped her off, and we could see the backhoe in the lot farther back, you know, digging the big ditch for it, and we could see it laying out there. But that following Monday at school, she came in and she was crying. We could tell she'd been crying again. We're like, what's the matter, you know? And she's like, my horse. And we're like, yeah, you know, I'm sorry to hear about your horse, you know, because she raised it since it was a foal. So she goes, no, something happened to it. And we're like, what happened to it? She's like, something dug up. And we're like, okay, yeah, you know, something probably dug at where it got buried at, you know, not the major. She's like, no, something dug it up and pulled it out of the ditch, or out of the hole that we put it in, or that they put it in. And we were like, well, what would do that? And she was like, I have no idea. But whatever it was, it completely took all the guts and stuff out of it. It completely hollowed it out. And so we couldn't explain that. But the thing is, around there, the biggest thing you would have are like coyotes and stuff. And there was nothing. The coyote can't pull a full-grown horse out of a hole. To this day, I still don't know what does it. What did it?
That is strange. Do you know of any other strange things that happened on her farm back then? Were any of their animals attacked?
If it was, she didn't say anything. Like, we would occasionally hear about, you know, some of their sheep disappearing, and other than that, we always just thought it was coyotes. One of my friends in that lived on the other side of the opposite direction of the one friend with the horse, she actually had 3 of her sheep disappear, like come up missing one day, and I helped her dad look for them. We couldn't find anything. Later we saw, you know, of course we saw, you know, vultures circling down by this big creek, and there's the whole wood line along the creek. So we went down there to look around, and we ended up finding the sheep. The thing is, I grew up, you know, raising like chickens and goats and all kinds of animals, and I know what, you know, coyotes do. I know what raccoons do, all that. I've never seen that. I've seen it when we got down there to the creek. All three of the sheep were there, but all their wool was like pulled off in clumps and set aside in a pile. It was really neat for some reason. All their guts were pulled out and set in a pile. Thing is, two of the sheep were on the ground, and the third one was stowed up in a tree. There was a tree that was about maybe 20 feet high, and about 8, 9 feet up, there was one of the sheep laying on across the branch. That kind of freaked us out a bit, because I thought it was a big cat, to be honest with you. Because I always heard, leopards and stuff putting some of the animals they catch up in trees, so it kind of scared us quite a bit, and we went back. But then later, my friend was telling me that night she was sitting on her porch, because they had a secondary porch on the upper story of their house. She said she was sitting up there watching the dogs chase the sheep around. I'm like, what, like coyotes? I figured coyotes were just chasing them around. She goes, no. Because these aren't coyotes. I'm like, well, what do you mean? She goes, no, when they get to the fence, they stand up, walk over, and hop over the fence, and then get back down on fours and chase them around. And we examined the fence where the sheep got out. We maybe like I said, like a coyote came in there, grabbed one, and took it off. No, these were fully grown sheep, because it was around dinner time, because we were all in 4-H. And we looked all around. There was no way the sheep could have got out, and there was no way anything could have got in, because the fence was still tacked down to the ground, and all the posts were there. It wasn't like, part of it got loose and the coyote could go way up underneath there, or the sheep could force his way out. There was no way, and the gate was still locked. So
that is awfully strange. Yeah, when you saw the remains, when you saw the sheep up in the tree, I can't blame you for thinking big cat. That does sound like something they would do. Is there a history of strange activity in that area that stretches back in time before you were born?
I would imagine so. Any of the adults always talk about, said the boogeyman. Mike and Dad always said, don't prick around after dark too long. You could go missing. And I thought it was just him trying to scare me. But then, like I said later, when I got into high school, I found out everybody was seeing stuff and hearing about things.
Did you ever hear about a person being attacked in that area back then?
Person? No. I have not personally heard anything, but I know a couple of my buddies would get out of there, when we would be daring the thing on London Road to come after you. You get out of the car and stand with your back to your car. And there was a couple of times they said they heard something run on the pavement, and it sounded like their feet on pavement. Running up behind the car. They always freaked out and jumped back in the car and took off.
Have there been any Bigfoot sightings reported in that area?
Again, I couldn't say yes or no. The area would seem yes, but it's in the southern part of Ohio, so yes, there are reportings and sightings down that way.
Yeah, southern Ohio with all the woods, there is a lot of activity down there. Please describe the topography of the area where these encounters happened, where your encounters happened.
The area was it was farmland that butted right up against the woods, and really heavily creeked area. It's mostly half farmland, really big corn stalks, or cornfields, and really have a lot of forest. You'll have clear spots here and there for, farming, but then for the most part it's woods in between everything else.
That area down there is pretty hilly too, isn't it? A lot of up and down?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say that there's times at night, if you're not careful, you swear you were on it. If you're on top of some of the hills, you'll think you're on top, you're the only spot of land on the planet after that. It's just pitch black. You look over the top of a hill, and it's just black everywhere.
When all this strange activity was going on, John, in your area, how did your mom react to it? Did she just try to explain it away, or did she even know about it going on?
See, my mom and my dad both were kind of weird when it came to that stuff. I would watch, of course, like Insert Show with Leonard Nimoy, all those shows, and it would scare me to death. It was I should have known better, but I still watched it. I got really scared. So she would go into the library, and we'd rent VHS videos and books on like Bigfoot and all these like monster books to show me it wasn't real, wasn't something to be afraid of. And my dad just kind of was like, I don't believe in that stuff. And that was it. Just simple as that. He's like, that stuff ain't real.
Yeah, that's a pretty typical response right there. How do you think she would have reacted if she knew they were real and, worse than that, in the area?
She would never let us outside. She wouldn't let us go outside at all.
Considering that you weren't attacked as a result of your encounters with them, do you think they're dangerous?
Well, in my honest opinion, I think they're a wild animal still, and I think they would hurt you if they felt threatened. I mean, you hear all the time about people getting, mauled by family pets. I can't imagine what a scared wild animal would do you? Especially if it's something, like I've seen, it's something that's, going to stand about 7 foot tall, who has claws and can easily do you some harm. I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of them.
Do you think they should be left alone, or do you want their existence proven?
I think I would honestly have to find one to prove they're real and leave them be.
Now that you know they're out there, can you go into the woods unarmed?
No. If I do, I am every little sound makes me spin around, and it just doesn't feel right. It feels like there's something always there, like watching you or hunting you. I mean, I feel better when we're deer hunting because I have, a shotgun or I have a bow. But if I'm like mushroom hunting or, just enjoying a walk in the woods, I mean, every little crack, every little noise, I mean, even if there's no noise, like on edge, I'm looking around. Figure out what's the fastest way to get back to my car and get out of there if I have.
That's probably a very good practice. Now that I've been into this for some time, I've already said publicly how it's funny. When you go out in the woods, at least for me, you'd swear there's a dog man behind every tree.
Oh, yeah.
It's got a strange effect on you when you know they're out there like that.
Mm.
All right, John, please tell us about your encounters. Be sure to share every last detail about them you can remember.
Me and one of my exes, we were driving down in the southeastern part of Ohio. We had some friends that lived out there. We would drive out there, hang out till like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and drive back. One night, we were driving back, and we had drove back a little early. We went there during the daytime, and the sun was setting. Actually, it just set. It was, in that twilight hour. So we're driving, and she drove this little tiny, I think it was a Dodge Neon. So we're driving along this back road, and it's barely like 1.5 lanes, if that. The area we're driving in it was solid trees on the other side. Except they were clear cut back a little ways, so in case you did break down, you could pull off the road. We're driving along, and we see deer run across the road, like no more than like 20 feet in front of us. So we jam on the brake, or she jams on the brakes because she was driving. We skid to a halt, and the whole time we're sliding towards the deer, we could see them. They're like kind of shaking and they're panting real hard, like they've been running for a while. And we just kind of were like, all right, looks like we probably scared them more than they scared us. So we come to a stop, and deer had moved on, so we slid to a stop, and we slowly crept forward a little bit. And I'm like, all right, take it slow, because where there's one, or where there's a couple, there's probably going to be more running out. And we don't want to, hit one back down here because we have no cell service. As we run up, or as we go to where they were, I look up the rearview mirror, and I have seen more deer run across the back road behind us. Instead, something else runs out. Well, I could see a big red shape, and it probably wasn't red. It was more or less, it was just being illuminated from the brake light. And I see something from about maybe the middle of their thighs to about maybe halfway up its stomach. And it's sticking out with its right leg. So its whole body's kind of half cocked towards me, or towards us in the rear view. And it puts its hand down, taking one step into the road. And as it steps down, it puts its hand down. It doesn't touch, I don't think it touched the back of the car, but it was kind of putting its hand down so it doesn't run into the car. And this is in one step. And then I see it, and just quickly clicks out of the rear view as it's forward, or steps on. So I looked it's honestly felt like forever, but I blink and I look for her, and she's pale as a ghost. And she's white, her mouth is open. She's like, what was that? And I don't know. And she goes, seriously, what the F was that? And I'm like, I don't know. So I look over out my side, out the passenger side window, and I open the door and get out, which I look on now. I think that's really stupid, but I just had to be sure that's what I saw. And as I get out and look to where it was headed, I see there was on the road, they had that clear cut back. The thing is, it dropped down a little bit, and the weeds were up really, really high. Because it doesn't look like, it looks like they only mow about once a year, if that, in that area. But, so we walked down, so as I look towards the tree line where it was headed, I see two really big shoulders, part of a back maybe halfway up from about the middle of the back up. I see a big half-flat head with pointed ears going into the woods. And it's just moving at its own pace. It's not running, it's just kind of moving forward at a normal pace. And so then it dawns on me, where there's one of those, he knows that there's more around, and I'm standing here with my back to the way it came. So I jump back in the car, and she goes, seriously, what was that? And I'm like, I don't know, let's go. And we drive home. And the whole way home, we didn't say a word about it until we got in the driveway. I look over at her, and she just starts crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she goes, what was that? I'm like, I don't know. I really don't. And she's, I don't want to go back there. I'm like, we won't have to. And I've never been back to that same area since. But yeah, it was, even now, I mean, I still don't exactly know what to call it, except it reminded me of like the back shoulders of a werewolf that you would always see in the movies. It wasn't, I mean, and I know for a fact it wasn't some guy in a ghillie suit. I mean, I know what ghillie suits look like, and that's not what I saw. It was hair. It was tall, and it had hands. I mean, I remember, if I think about its eyes, I know exactly what its hand looks like. And that happened 10, 15 years ago, and I can still recall it to this day.
When you got out of the car and took a good look at it, by the way, you've got a lot more guts than I've got. I'd never do something like that.
Like I said, I just had to be sure what I saw. I mean, one of the things were like, really? I mean, that wasn't a no,
I'm impressed. When you got out and saw it walk across the road like that, and then jumped out of the car to have a better look, did any of its actions give you the impression that it might be more intelligent than a normal animal would be?
Well, for one, just because it put its, I'm impressed because it put its hand up to not run in the back of the car. I mean, I've stopped in the middle of the road and had deer running to the side of the car. I wasn't moving and the deer ran into it. So there is some thought there. And I think that if they're smart enough to keep hidden, then yeah, they're pretty intelligent.
You saw it place its hand on the car's trunk. How would you describe its hand? Did you see any claws or any long nails?
Yes. They had nails. Like you would honestly think like a stereotypical movie. You know, they had claws. They were just, like I said, they were red from the tail lights, but yeah, they were clawed.
They were claws and not fingernail-like.
They might have been fingernail-like. I did see some reflection off of them from the red, but they were, they were pointed.
Wow. Did
They
you get
came to a point.
They came to a point. Did you get an idea for how long they might be?
No, I didn't.
That's all right. As shocked as you were, I can't blame you. I don't think anyone can. When you got out of the car and saw the creature, the dog man from behind, you talked about its shoulders and how it was built. When you were looking at it like that, did it give the impression like Sasquatches do, you know how they look like they don't have a neck? With this thing, did it look like its head was sitting directly on top of its shoulders the same way, giving that no-neck appearance, or what?
No, you could tell that it had a neck, so it could probably turn its head left or right, but it wasn't like a human neck where its shoulders sit real low, and it was more square built. Like their whole body, the shoulders into the neck, into the head look like two squares just on top of each other. So you could tell that there was a neck, but it wasn't super definitive.
I'm impressed you were able to notice that much detail. Now, did you get a good enough look at it to see if its pointed ears that you mentioned were more on top of its head or on the sides of its head?
It was kind of a mix of both. I mean, they were really wide. They weren't like super wide, but they were cocked, I think, different. Kind of like, they honestly reminded me of like a pincher's ear. Like they were from the back. They remind me kind of like a shepherd's would sit kind of almost off kilter, like almost like a half X on the side and on the top of the head.
So they had kind of a cropped look like a pincher's ears have.
Yeah. Yeah, they were straight up.
Now, if it had a tail, when you got out of the car to get a better look, would you have seen or noticed if it did have one?
The weeds were up really high where it went down this little embankment, so I didn't see a tail. No, like it went, off the side of the road, it went down a little bit where they had cut it back. And the weeds were up really high, and all I could see was about maybe the middle of the back up. So if it had a tail, I would not know.
Did you ever hear any sounds that it might have made?
The only sounds that I really heard was that it crashed into the woods after the deer. That's all I heard. Like, I didn't hear any breathing. The only breathing I could hear was my own.
If you had to guess on how tall this thing was, what would you estimate?
I actually now drive a car just like the one she does. So when I measured it against my proportions, it would have stood over 8.5 feet tall. Because I measured it to where the bumper was hitting on me, where it would be hitting on it, and it would have been over 8 feet.
Wow, that's a big one. If it was that tall, what kind of weight estimate would you make?
I would say between 400 and 800, well, about 600 pounds, because it wasn't fat at all. It was actually really, really built. It was really, I wouldn't say skinny, but it was definitely, built. There was no fat on it. There was no anything like that.
When you looked out that back window when it was lit up by the brake lights and it had that reddish glow you were talking about, and you saw its hand right behind the car, you say you saw it from about mid-thigh up. I take it from what you're describing, what you saw had a leg structure that was very similar to what you would expect a person to have, or a Bigfoot. It looked like it had a conventional knee, no canine type leg structure, correct?
Right.
All right. When you got out of the car, were there any strange smells in the air?
Strange smell. I didn't notice if there was any smell or anything at all.
After that incident, did you ever go back to that location and look for prints?
Not at all. No way. I was not wanting to go back here, and I still haven't went back there.
I don't blame you. How close are you living now to that area where all this happened?
It's actually about an hour and a half. It's close, but not too close.
When you got out and took a look, did you ever see it turn around to look at you? From what you were saying, it sounds like it never did turn. It just kept its back to you and kept going.
Nope. It was just kept going after the deer. So that's what I've always thought was just pushing those deer till they dropped from exhaustion, or maybe it was leading them into a trap or something.
So through the whole thing, it didn't seem to have any interest in you or your girlfriend whatsoever, just totally focused on the deer.
Nope, not at all. If I don't even think it would have really even minded if we were there or not, because like I said, I think it inconvenienced it by, we got in its way.
Well, you didn't seem to slow it down much, that's for sure, which
Mm-mm.
I'm glad it didn't slow down and do anything to you.
Yeah.
Now, you've got another encounter with something that might have been one of these things. Please share the details of that with us.
All right. This encounter actually happened before the going behind the car. Anyway, me and the same girl and a couple of friends, we were out driving around like normal. We decided to pull off on one of the little back roads and just kind of hang out. And he had brought along some vodka, and we figured we'd just listen to music and, get drunk. So we pull off on the road, and the road's like a really bad gravel road. This one here, this is, of course, clear cut back to where you didn't have to worry about maintaining the road hardly at all. So we find a little area that looks like kind of like a breakdown lane almost. Like it's around a bend. There's a bunch of gravel and stuff set up where to pull off the side of the road you could. So we pulled off there. And I remember the time of year because the honeysuckle bushes were blooming, and and I loved the smell. So we pulled off and we put the windows down, turn up the radio, and start drinking. And I didn't drink that night because, one, I did drink vodka, and two, I had work in the morning, and I don't like going to work like that. So we're all kind of just hanging out, listening to the music, and a couple hours pass, and it's getting dark, and we could hear something behind us will be behind us since we're off the road. There's gigantic honeysuckle bush. I mean, it had to have at least been 10, 12 feet tall, and I don't even know how far back it went. But we're all sitting there having a good time, and we hear something crunching, something getting closer and closer, and the snapping branches getting louder and louder. The guy that was with us, he threw the empty vodka bottle up into the bush, into that honeysuckle bush where the sound was coming from. So immediately got quiet. So we're like, all right, it's scared off. It's cool. Within like a minute or two, that bottle comes flying back, goes over top of us, because we're still in the breakdown lane where all the gravel is off the side of the road, and it smashes in the road. And that scares the hell out of all of us. We all freak out and jump in the car, and we take off, going back the way we came. The thing is, going back the way we came, we had to stop in the middle of the road because there is I think it was a Firebird Trans Am or one of the two. And it was his baby, and he did not want to even try and take it off the road to go around it. So me and him got out to move it. And so we each grabbed one half, or I grabbed one side, he grabs the other, and we couldn't lift it. We couldn't move it at all. So we ended up both getting on one side and just twisting it, pulling it up, spinning it to where we could buy. The whole time, like, we're sitting there doing that, and the whole time it acted like it acted like it was windy, because all we could hear was like branches like cracking and snapping and breaking, but there was no wind at all. There was a horrible, horrible smell that just came over everybody. Like, it almost burned your eyes and made you want to throw up. And it smelled like wet dog, rotten meat, and like animal and garbage. I mean, it was horrible. And so we're trying to choke back from puking and stuff and moving that, and we're scared and everything else. We finally spin this thing out of the road, and we jump in the car and take off when we get out of there. And the thing is, there was no, that branch, half of the tree, I can just say it's probably half of the tree, because it was fresh too, where it got broke off. Because the leaves were still, green, they weren't wilted, they weren't anything like that. There was no wind, and not to mention they cut the tree line back away from the road, and where you could see sky above it. I mean, there was no way that it just happened to break, happened to fall onto the road, like that. There was no way. Someone or something had to put it there.
If that branch was put there on the road, do you think it was dogmen that did it?
Yeah, that could have been one of them. That could have been a whole bunch of them. I mean, because we were getting breaks and cracks and snaps on both sides of the road. I mean, there was the side I was on, which was the passenger side, starting out. I mean, it was really, really loud. And the thing, like I said, the thing is, there was nobody out there. There was no one. I mean, like, we could have easily played off as, like, somebody was out here and they threw the ball back. No, there was nobody, period. And the thing is, it's starting to get dark, so, I mean, you couldn't see anything anyway. And I think specifically, if there was anything out there like it, they laid a trap.
If it was a group of dogmen that put that out on the road, do you think they put it there to keep you from leaving the area? Or do you think maybe they did that to keep other people out?
I don't know. Both of those could say yes. You could say yes, that they were doing that to make sure we couldn't leave, but also they were doing that to make sure other people didn't come into that area.
Did you tell any friends or family about any of your encounters?
When we got back from the main sighting, the one I can say definitive what I saw, we told my friend's mom, my girlfriend at the time, her mom, and she just made fun of us the whole time. She made fun of us. She said, sure did, you guys are out there probably smoking pot or something, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, no, we saw something out there. And she's like, She goes, next time, tell Bigfoot I'm having a cookout next Sunday in the backyard. It wants to come, just come on us. So we just kind of didn't talk about it.
After getting a reaction like that, which most people do, unfortunately, I can't blame them or you for not wanting to share it with anyone else. Now, experiencing what you experienced, seeing what you saw, if you had to encounter one or the other out in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods, would you rather run into one of these things, like what you saw, or a Bigfoot?
Option C, none. I gotta say, either way, I think you're going to be on the losing side. I guess it would depend on the temperament of any of them. I would not like to run into any of them. Unless it was like 300 yards away and I was looking through a binocular and I was, sitting in my car where I could easily get away.
Going back to the encounter where the vodka bottle got thrown out into the road, when that happened, who did that scare the worst?
Who did that scare the worst?
That's right, you said it was you, your girlfriend, and two of her friends out there.
Yeah. I think we all kind of were scared the same because that was something we did not expect at all. And two, that took some pretty good coordination. I mean, it wasn't that to throw something back. I mean, to throw something back, and the thing is, it easily hit us with that bottle, but it didn't. I mean, the fact that it threw it past, like over our heads, over the car, into the road, it was pretty much just saying, "Hey, get out of here! Don't come back." Kind of how dare you throw something at me? You know, I want to throw something back.
When you consider that it threw the bottle over where you were standing, when it could have thrown it right at you to hit you, and also when you consider when you were outside of the car with your friend moving that big branch with all the sound and the smell, there might have been a group out there right around you. The fact that you didn't get attacked then, are you open to the possibility that maybe that group wasn't necessarily as vicious as you might expect them to be just from their looks?
Yeah. So I look back on it now and say, yeah, I mean, they could have easily gotten us multiple times. And I do believe that there was quite a few of them because when we all got back to my girlfriend's house, we said our goodbyes to her friends that took off. She's like, I was worried about you guys moving that branch. I'm like, well, yeah, it was pretty scary stuff. She goes, no. She's like, did you see anything when you were moving it? I'm like, no, I was just focused on moving it. And she's like, well, the whole time you guys were moving that branch, there was, I think, four or five walls of black moving around in the tree. I'm like, what? And she's like, really dark objects moving, going from tree to tree. I'm like in the tree? She goes, no, on the ground. I'm like, well, how big do you think they were? And she was like, big. She was like a black wall moving through the tree, like towards you guys.
Wow.
That really freaked me out. So she said there's about 4 or 5 of them on either side of the road that would see moving.
Yeah, that's the kind of information you need to know about right away, not after the fact. Have there been any lingering negative effects that you've been suffering from after your encounters?
Well, the only ones, like being, over the coppice in the woods, like I said, every little crack of a branch, every snap of a twig, I turn around and look, expecting to see one of these things standing there or anything like that, but never anything. There for a while after I saw the one behind the car, I kept having dreams about it.
You had nightmares.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't really nightmares. It just played all the time in my sleep. Like, I would wake up, I'd fall asleep, and I'd be doing the same thing over and over again. I was stuck on like a loop.
It sounds like it affected your girlfriend a lot more severely than it affected you. Did you know of any lingering PTSD or any other lingering issues that she had as a result? No,
the only thing that happened with her is after it happened, we talked about what we saw, and she said it was like a werewolf, we saw a werewolf. And she refused to watch like any werewolf movies or anything like that. Like, she wouldn't watch any Bigfoot shows or anything to do with paranormal or cryptozoology or anything like that. She would not watch.
I can't say I'll blame her.
She would leave the room, or she would, be like, can you please turn this? I'm like, yeah, no, I'll just watch it later.
Have you heard of any strange activity, John, that's still going on in that area?
nothing really, this is going to sound really funny, but nothing out of the ordinary. Just occasionally, animals will disappear. Actually, the thing that kind of shocked me, a couple years ago, about 2 years ago, my brother was seeing this girl, and she was over at our place one day, and we were flipping through the channels, and we turned on Finding Bigfoot or something like that. We were kind of joking around, kind of half making fun of him. And she goes, John, I need to talk to you real quick. I'm like, okay. She goes, do you believe in that stuff? I'm like, oh yeah, it's cool, And she goes, did you ever go on London Road? And my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, what did you just say? Evidently she grew up around that area too. And I had no idea. And she talks about one time she broke down out there. And she was sitting in her car. It was nighttime. And she was sitting in her car. And she was waiting on her friends to come pick her up. And she was just kind of laying with her eyes half closed. And she said she felt something like walk up and shake the back of her car. And so she thought it was one of her friends messing around. So she clicks on her light, and she said she didn't see anything. When she looked around, expecting one of her friends to be there. And so she clicked the lights off and waited a little bit more. And it kept happening. So she's kind of thought it was really weird. So she started getting freaked out. And it turns out that her friends were actually just right up the road, and they were coming down and saw her hazards going. So she goes so they come and see her, and they were like, kind of glad we got here when we did. And she's like, why? She goes, see that? And she's like, what? She goes, well, we were sitting there with her hazard lights on, the lights were off. She goes, her friend was like, yeah, the thing on London Road was on your passenger side. And she's like, wait, what do you mean? She's like, when we pulled up, he said, we saw something black away from your car.
Oh, wow.
She said, yeah. I was like, wait, what? He told me it all again, and she swears up and down that she thinks that the thing on London Road was shaking her car to get her out of the car.
Wow. Yeah, that really makes you wonder what its motivations were if it was doing that.
Like I said, the thing is, I never uttered the words about that to her at all. She came over once and we were watching, like I said, Finding Bigfoot or something like that. And she brings it up. And I had never talked to her about that before. So I didn't say anything. And she's like, I tried to talk to your brother about this, but he doesn't believe me. I'm like, oh, well, I believe you.
Were there any other encounters that happened to you or anyone that you know you might be able to share?
No, that was really about it. I mean, aside from just all the old stories that, I had when I was growing up, the thing on London Road chased my car and stuff like that.
Well, John, I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing the details of those encounters with us.
Oh, no, thank you. I mean, I'm happy that, I have somebody listen to me that doesn't think I'm crazy or making something up.
Oh, no, I know better than that. You're definitely not crazy. I hear the crazy word all the time when someone contacts me to report an encounter. I always tell them, no, you're not crazy and you're not alone. It's just unfortunate you had to live through these things, but the past is the past. What can you do?
I just hope my stories for somebody else to come forward their encounters. Like you said, you're not alone. If one person's seen it, probably more have. So just don't be afraid to speak up. Only we'll figure something out.
Those are really good words. That's one of the things I tell eyewitnesses. It might be painful to talk about it at first, to open up old wounds, but in a lot of cases, talking about it is therapy. Like I said, thanks again so much for your time. Thanks again for sharing that.
Oh, it's no problem at all. I'll keep my ear open, though. If I hear any of the news that's popped up, I'll let you know.
I appreciate it, buddy. Definitely don't be a stranger. Please do keep in touch.
All right. I won't.
All right. Well, thanks again and have a great night.
Yep, you too, man.
Thanks.
All right, buddy.
Bye. Episode 4. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. When you were small, your parents told you that monsters don't exist. How would you react if one day you found out that they do? In 1972, while on a camping trip in the Ozarks, Pam had a terrifying encounter in the middle of the night. Pam's here tonight to share the details of that encounter with you. Pam, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm glad to help out.
You've got such an interesting story. There are a lot of people out there that are going to be absolutely riveted by it.
It's interesting, all right. I wish I didn't have the story to tell you the truth. It's a pretty creepy thing to have happen.
Tell us about your outlook on cryptids like Bigfoot or dogmen before you had your encounter.
Before I had my encounter, I had no idea, no inkling about cryptids. I was only 18 at the time of my encounter. And so before that, I was tied up with going to school and so forth, and I really had heard nothing about Bigfoot. My dad had grown up in the woods as a logging family up in Tacoma area, Mount Rainier area, and he had told us some stories when we were kids, but they weren't, the word Bigfoot never came up. He told us stories about how when he was playing in the woods, how they could not go into the woods because there were cannibals in the woods. And I always thought that was a story his mother had told him and the people had told them to keep him out of the woods. But I had no idea about Bigfoot, dogmen, any kind of cryptid, really, none.
Most people don't. That's not surprising. Back then, if someone had come up to you and told you that they had had an encounter with one, with a dogman, would you have laughed or just basically brushed it off?
I guess it would be been determined by who told me and my respect level for them. But basically, I would have just thought, wow, you're seeing things, or you mistakenly identified something. because the world was pretty cut and dried to me. I mean, you know, a bear is a bear, a wolf is a wolf, and so forth. And if you'd told me you'd seen something in between, I'd have really thought, oh yeah, you probably saw a bear, you know, and I think that's the normal reaction that everyone has when you haven't entered that world of, hey, that's neither one. You've seen it for yourself. And I kind of feel like the same thing when people say, hey, I saw a UFO. Not having seen one, you don't have any real reference. You just listen to the person and say, wow, you know, that's pretty interesting. But you really, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, it was a glint off an airplane or it was a weather balloon.
Most people that do have their encounter do fit into that category as being almost one of those people that you know that are going to be the last person on earth that would believe that there could be something like that out there. Not saying that you fit into that category, but...
No, I agree. And another point is we were Army brat kids, and we moved frequently. My dad was the true outdoorsman, so we were always out camping, always outdoors, and he was always imparting knowledge to us. And so being out in the woods, number one, gives you more of a chance to encounter something odd. And so most of the people who have these encounters are people who are out in the woods. So, but being practical people, you know, we're used to camping, we're used to living more simply out in the woods, and when you have an encounter like this, it just goes against everything. It is definitely not simple, and it definitely doesn't fit into anything you can categorize it about. But being out in the woods more exposes you to more. Any camping person or woods person has seen every bear, every cougar, every deer, every elk. You know their sounds and so forth. And so when something like this hits you and it doesn't fit into any known category, I think that even more so really tests your reality. It gives you a real reality check.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Even for a seasoned outdoorsman, running into something like a dogman would have to send one heck of a jolt down your spine. I don't think anyone could ever be prepared for something like that. But leading up to your encounter, Pam, what chain of events led to you being at the location of your encounter?
Well, at the time we lived in Leavenworth, Kansas. My dad had retired from the military and moved there because my mother had family around there. And I married at 16. This was 2 years later, so I was 18. And I had a 16-year-old brother, and my husband was 20 at the time. We had 2 children by that time. My daughter was 14 months old, and I had a son 2 months old. So I had 2 infants at that time. So we were a married couple. My husband, fortunately, had taken a lot of classes to learn to be a CPA, and he was very happily employed and had a really, really good job, especially for a 20-year-old in that time. And I wouldn't say we were financially set, but we were definitely middle class. We weren't poor. We weren't on welfare. We weren't, like you would picture an 18 and 20-year-old with 2 kids. We had a 68 Volkswagen van at the time, and the year was 1972, so it was a fairly decent car. We were financially fine. We didn't have large debt. We were a happy couple. I had graduated school early. He had also. So we were just a happy young couple living in Kansas, and both of us had grown up in families that had traveled a lot, so I still do have the travel bug. And we would go on day trips and road trips, and then after the children were born, we'd go and visit relatives in like Michigan and Arkansas and so forth. And so it was one trip to Arkansas earlier that we had decided we'd come back and camp there because it was so beautiful and it wasn't very far from home. that led up to us planning this trip to go camping in Arkansas, and we decided we'd bring my brother with me, who's 16 at the time, for a little help, because I had the two infants, and he was just wanting to go camping so badly. So it would be the three adults, the two babies, and a Volkswagen van, and we had planned this trip for I would say 3 to 6 months, and we had it all figured out, and we were just looking forward to going to Beaver Lake in or around Rogers, Arkansas. And the reason we chose that spot was in the earlier trips down there, we had discovered it was a Army Corps of Engineer project to build this giant lake kind of in the Ozarks area. And there was going to be all this camping around it and all these opportunities. And it was just such a gorgeous area. We determined we're going to go back there when that state park opens. And that's where we were going to camp.
Now, this area at Beaver Lake where you had the encounter, how far were you from what you could call civilization back then?
It was pretty remote. It was at least 10 miles to Rogers, Arkansas, which wasn't a huge city in itself. It was very small. So I would say to Rogers, if you picture Rogers, Arkansas as like the outpost, the closest place you'd go to get fishing gear and so forth, and it just had a few stores and so forth. It was a good 10 miles to there, and probably 25 to the next real civilization population. But on the opposite side of this project, this Beaver Lake project, there were homes and there were roads and other probably mom and pop stores and things like that. But on the back side where all the camping was, where we were, at least 10 miles to that small town of Rogers. It was in the middle of nowhere. A funny side point is this river they dammed to make this giant reservoir and to hold back flooding. It was a project, a flood project type thing, and to make the recreation area. They dammed up this area and they had to relocate a lot of people out of the bottomlands. I don't know how many homes, but they weren't recently built homes. They weren't homes of high value, and it wasn't like it was a city, but they had to remove some homes and relocate people from this project. And that kind of figured into our experience there, because we actually had heard on the news before we went down that there were some problems with doing this project because people were mad about having to relocate. There were some minor, not riots, but protests and so forth, and the movie Deliverance came out after that, and it was loosely based story kind of on this project. If you can imagine, we hadn't seen the movie. It hadn't come out yet, but if you can imagine the prelude to this trip being kind of like having watched Deliverance and wanting to go to that recreation area that they just made. That's kind of the feeling we all had, because we'd heard, oh yeah, there were some people being displaced, and they were kind of angry, but, well, it's all built now, it should be fine.
Yeah, that's not a very good, comforting thought at all.
It figured into our plans, believe me.
I could see why. Yeah, that doesn't set the table for a good scene. Well, Pam, if you would, please tell us all about your encounter. Please share every last detail that you can remember.
Okay. Well, like I said, we had a Volkswagen van, the old style. In our planning, we had removed the center seat, so we had a back seat to the van, the two bucket seats up front, and the plan was that ledge that was over the back engine compartment, we were going to put the kids up there to sleep on. And I was going to sleep on the back seat, and my husband at the time was on the center floor in a sleeping bag. My brother was going to camp out in a small pup tent. So, we had the usual small amount of camping gear. We never took tons of stuff like we do today. We had the van packed, and we were happy to go. And it was October, and it wasn't, you could expect some rain, but it wasn't like winter, in the north or northwest where I'm living now. So we had this trip planned to go down there in October, and this Army Corps project had just finished. We knew the finish date, and we planned to be the first ones going camping. We figured it wouldn't be very busy. The reason we didn't want it to be very busy is we had 2 infants with us, and camping with 2 infants outdoors, not in a camper, you didn't want the babies waking up and crying to bother any other campers. It's kind of like going on a plane trip sitting next to 2 infants. You can imagine how happy that group of passengers would be if they're crying all night. So we planned on getting there that first day and really scouting around to find a real private site so the kids wouldn't wake up anybody. So we took off, and we were very experienced campers. Very experienced campers. My dad, being a military man, had, during the Vietnam War era and even before that, in fact, he retired out of the military. He was an older father. My parents were 30 before we were born. And at that time, that was an older parent. But they were really good at teaching us. They were really patient with teaching us kids. So we'd go camping a lot. My dad got a month every year vacation, and we always spent it on the road going home to visit relatives. If we were in country, most of the time we were not. We were, for instance, in Germany and so forth. But even in Germany, we went camping. He taught us wilderness survival, and he had taught that in the military to some degree also. So he was really good at teaching us how to camp with less and how to really enjoy the outdoors. So we had put that into our planning, and that's what we were going to do going down to Arkansas. And so we were well prepared and very, very seasoned campers. And in fact, the day my dad retired, he announced to us that as his retirement present for the next 30 days, we were going to live in the woods. Well, it ended up being almost 6 months. We lived in a big tent in the woods. And he was just enjoying being free, not having to set the alarm clock. And he was an MP in the service, and so we thought it was going to be a month in the woods, and we were there for nearly 6 months. So when I say we were experienced wilderness campers, I mean experienced. So anyway, we headed out, and we had no fear of the woods. There wasn't anything out there that we didn't know how to deal with or how to recognize, or the sounds, like foxes can make hideous sounds in the woods, screaming, and elk can bugle and sound really, really odd. So we were prepared. Even though I was 18 and my brother was 16, my husband at the time was 20, we headed out, and we were crazy enough to take a 2-month-old on a camping trip. Let's put it that way. So off we went. We got to the campground area. It wasn't a very long trip from Kansas, so we scouted the whole area, and we found that up by the dam there was this awesome swimming picnic area, and there was no one in this park, not anyone. We were there during the opening week. And then we drove around looking for a really secluded spot so the kids waking in the night wouldn't bother anybody. Well, pretty much out on the perimeter of this camp area, we found this cul-de-sac site, and it just had 2, maybe 3 sites, and just a fire ring and a picnic table. And when you got there, you drove in to a cul-de-sac type, just a little circle, and you come back out this dirt road, and it was ringed with a really tall, almost like a retaining wall. That's what it would look like if you can picture it. It looked like a retaining wall of stone. It was a naturally occurring ridge, and it looked maybe like it was limestone, and it was in a horseshoe shape. And if anyone's ever been to the Ozarks, they know how these ridges and outcroppings kind of wind their way through the whole Arkansas area, or Ozarks area, and this was one of those big outcroppings, and we were far from the lake. We were miles from the lake. But this big ridge kind of formed the end of this cul-de-sac. And so it looked like this was going to be the perfect spot because it would be really quiet. There were no other campers there. It was one of the farthest back spots. So we decided on that spot. We went and looked at a few others, came back to that spot. By that time it was getting to be, later afternoon. So we got back to the spot and we kind of scoped it out. We had planned actually to go climbing it later or the next day and check it out because we didn't know what was on the other side of it. Although we could see trees up at the top. The ground level at the top was about 50 feet above us. And this horseshoe-shaped ridge started at the left it started at about 50 feet tall, wound back into the woods, so we don't know where the level went from there, but it was about 50 feet up. And then as it wrapped around, it went in the horseshoe shape to the right. It went out, it was about 125 feet or more tall at the top. We were like in a little canyon. And then it went around about 75 feet you could see of it, and then it went off into the forest to the right. So really don't know how far that wall went or what it was, but it looked like they'd carved the campsite right out of that area. The only site that we could see at this time was about 30 or 40 feet away and down from us. We chose the upper terrace campsite, and then it went down about 10 feet, and the next level was another campsite. And then that one was basically on the road as you came in, and we went uphill from that and pulled in above them on this little terrace. So we thought, wow, this is really perfect. This is remote, shouldn't be able to bother anyone. It's got a good fire pit, pulled in face forward in the van, had the back of the van facing out toward that rock wall. There was a little bit of brush in between us and some wispy trees in between us and the site down below. It was newly put in. It was a gravel road. It was pretty gravelly around the fire pit and the picnic table. But my brother jumped out, put his pup tent up between the van and the fire ring. There was about 10 or 15 feet. He put his tent up there. And then between the fire ring and that rock wall was only about 10 feet at this point, at this campsite. And then it curved out and away from the campsite as it went to the apex of that horseshoe shape. So he was setting up his tent site, and I was tending to the kids, and they were predicting a lot of rain coming up. So we knew there were storms coming in, and we chose that top site because we wanted good drainage away from our site. And even though it was forested around us and at the top of that big ridge, it was a clear open space above us. We had no trees overhead. It was like you're in a big fishbowl and you could see out the top really clearly. And we were looking forward to it being a really good dark spot for night star watching and so forth. And then we heard there were storms coming. So we thought, no star watching tonight. We set up, we explored around the area. No one had ever camped there before. The fire ring was totally empty. This was the first weekend. So we were really privileged. Well, we made some sandwiches and we decided we weren't going to cook anything for supper because it was going to rain. So let's go drive around and let's go back to that swimming area and see what it looked like. So we went back to the swimming picnic area and looked at the dam, and it was a sunny day still, and it was still warm enough to swim. We knew the rain was going to be coming, and it came, and it was a drenching downpour. I mean, just the kind where your windshield wipers can't keep up with it. So we made back to camp, and just kind of sat in the van and ate sandwiches and so forth. And there was no way you were going to make a fire. It was a downpour. And we decided, well, we'll go to bed early as soon as it gets dark and make a new day of it the next day. So, we turned in. The kids were really, really good. They were really sleepy. My brother slept in his pup tent even though it was pouring down rain. He was okay. Had a good night's sleep. next day, woke up bright and early, as soon as the sun came up. The kids had wakened in the night, had to feed the baby, that kind of thing, but we were up really early. Because of the rain all night long, there's no way we could make a fire, and it'd be too much trouble, make a fire and cook anything. So we decided just eat some more cold snacks and foods and take off and go to the swimming area because it looked like the sun was breaking and it was looking like a pretty good day. So we made our way over there, and the whole area was flooded. Even the parking lot at that swim site above the dam was at least 4 feet underwater. I mean, we drove up there and it was so different from the day before. We just looked at it and it was gray and the water was really running full of twigs and everything, and we looked around and said, it's not a swimming day. My brother and I had no intention of swimming, but it was sunny. There were lots of cloud breaks. It was getting sunny. It was still too cold for us, but my husband decided he was going to go in and check it out. He had been looking forward to it. So he swam around the area, and there was this tree that would have been at the end of the parking lot. However, it was now under 4 feet of water. The tree had water about 4 feet up it. He swam out to the tree and he was telling us, it's not cold at all. It's actually quite fine. And so he was just kind of swimming around this tree, and he was grabbing onto the branches and having a good time, and we were just sitting in the van, and weather turned nice, so we went outside and sat on the picnic table, and my brother was like, nah, I'm not going in there. So we looked up, and all of a sudden we couldn't see him anymore. We couldn't see my husband. He was just gone. And I asked my brother to go check it out and see where he'd gone. And he went over there and he looked and he looked, couldn't find him anywhere. And then all of a sudden, my brother sees his head pop up, and it's way out in the lake. I mean, farther out than it should be. And he starts hollering at him, but there was this big current out there because of the water rushing towards the dam. There was an undercurrent, and the more he struggled to come back to shore, the more he was just at a standstill. And my brother yelled to me and said, he's stuck in the lake. I think he's going to drown. And ran over there, and I could tell he was winded. He was swimming as hard as he could, but he was making no progress. So my brother went out to the tree that was in the water and grabbed a branch, a big long branch that was sticking in the water, and he was holding onto it and stretching out as far as he could into the lake to see if there was something he could extend to him. He was yelling at me, do you have a rope or whatever? Just then the branch breaks off. And so my brother was still holding this big long branch, and he swam out a little bit and stuck the branch out there, and by some miracle, my husband was able to grab a small part of the branch, and he was able to pull him back onto land. But by the time he got to the parking lot, to the land, pulled in, he could not stand. He was choking and vomiting water. So he had literally seconds before he was a goner. He was just drowned, basically. So my brother was working on reviving him and helping him, and he was coming to, even though he was blue in the face and gasping. He was coughing horribly. We hunkered him back in the van. I got in the front seat, and at the time, I was not good at driving a stick shift. I just didn't have any practice. So I was really figuring out this shift pattern in this van. All of this happening, you would have thought, this is time to go home. But no, we were young and adventurous, and we were like, nah, this is okay. We'll get over this. So we decided we were going. He needed some medical help, so we stopped on the way out of the park and talked to a ranger who said, Rogers, Arkansas is only about 10 to 14 miles away. There's an ER there. Go ahead, or a little medical clinic. So we drove there, and all the time, my husband was in the back coughing and shivering and coughing and shivering, and he was just mostly unconscious, and my brother was tending to him. Well, we get to this small medical clinic, and they take him in, and they do an x-ray. They said he had pneumonia. He had so much water in his lungs that he should stay at least overnight one day. Because infection could set up, whatever. And he was running a fever, and he was still coughing up spray. I mean, just so much water. But he would not stay. We wanted him to stay. We had health insurance and everything. They would cover it. But he was like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm feeling much better. And no matter of talking, no amount of talking into him would make him stay. So we were going to go. So he wrapped up in a sleeping bag, and we said, let's go to a motel. Nope, we got the camp back there. I'm going to be fine, he says. So let's go back to the camp. By tomorrow, I'm not going to wreck our vacation. By tomorrow, I'll be fine. So my brother and I were looking at each other like, I don't think so, but he was insistent. So we go back to the camp. He was wrapped in every blanket we could have, and he was shivering and coughing and sitting in the middle of the van floor. And we ate and watched over him. And the doctor said that the first sign of a fever, because the fever had gone, or loss of consciousness, we have to go to the ER with him. So my brother and I decided we'd watch him all night long. We ran the van's heater, we watched him till dark, and shut down everything, and it was dark, and my brother and I decided on who was going to take shifts and watch him all night long. But we had also determined that after dark, we would have a horrible time getting back to the ER because the roads were terrible and dark and windy and wooded in the daylight. And in the dark, it would have been just treacherous to get back there, and we'd probably take a wrong turn and so forth. So we figured it'd be pretty dumb to try to get out of there at night, especially if you're in a hurry. So we were going to really watch him and make sure he was going to be okay all night. So I kept the first watch, and my brother went out to sleep in the pup tent. And it was a fair night. It was around 60-some degrees. And I had the kids outside with me and fed them at the picnic table and watched the fire and let everybody get to sleep. And they went to sleep. So I put them to bed in the little ledge over the back of the van. Again, the back window of the van was facing out towards that rock ledge. I put them to sleep, and my husband was just breathing noisily and coughing, and then he'd sleep and then cough more. And it was full darkness when, it must have been 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Of all things, we heard a vehicle come in. And I mean, the last place on earth you would think someone else would come to camp was that cul-de-sac. It was so far to get there, and it was so windy, and it was so lonely. That's why we chose it. And here was this pickup truck coming in really slowly, and I thought, oh my gosh, well, they got here in the dark. I bet they don't leave, because like I said, it was horrible to get out of that road in the dark. Sure enough, they pulled in, and they were pulling a little pop-up tent camper type rig. So they backed it into their camping spot below us, and it was full on dark. But I could look out the van windows down at them and see there was a man and a woman and maybe 2 kids, and they just pulled up the camper, did some minor moving around for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and I saw some flashlights come on up. They were very quiet, and they pretty much went to bed, I guess. They didn't do a fire, they didn't cook, they just pulled in and minorly popped up their tent camper, and I think they unhooked it from their truck at that time, but it was very, very quiet. And I didn't have any problem staying awake watching my husband because I was just wound up on adrenaline from that day. I was really thinking there's a chance he'd die in the night. I was just freaking out. And I was sitting there in the dead quiet listening, and I could hear small animals outside and some kind of crazy noises from up on that bluff above us. And I heard the fire that we had built was burnt down to just embers and small cracks. I mean, just barely some light from this fire. And every once in a while it would blow up and, you know, we'd have some good light and I could look out and see what was out there. And I was just wired. I was wide awake. So I was just leaning there. And then I heard, this was about half an hour or 40 minutes after the people below us went to sleep. Not very long at all. I heard this kind of a gruff sound. And I thought of maybe it was a bear, you know, kind of bear bark, a big woof sound or gruff sound. And so I really sat up and I looked out the window and I was looking everywhere and the fire would come up and I could look everywhere. I could see on the glow of the rock wall all the way around. The fire made a glow. And I thought, oh, it was probably the people, maybe the people below us have a dog, you know, and I just didn't know it or something. So I was just looking around, trying to see what made that sound. And then right after the gruff, while I'm looking around, there was this really long, kind of a whistly, howling woot sound like you'd hear a coyote make. And I think it came from up on the butte on the top of this ridge, but way off. And it was just kind of a long whistle, and then it went woot. And it went for a long time, but it was kind of whistly. And it was a long ways away, and so I immediately thought coyote. You know, oh great, there's coyotes. So all of a sudden, my brother jumps out of his little pup tent, eased open the van, and jumped in. And I looked at him and said, "It's a coyote." And he goes, "I don't think so." He said when he was laying there in the pup tent, the first gruff sound, it penetrated the pup tent and kind of, you know, made it sound like it was just right over his tent. I said, "No, I'm looking out the window at you." And he says, "I know, but I'm telling you, it hit me like a shock wave." And when that coyote sound happened, that was it. I'm getting in the van. He says, "I'm sitting in the front seat." I was like, okay, so he's high on adrenaline too, you know, so he hops up in the front passenger seat. And I was just hoping and praying that the kids wouldn't wake up and start crying, so we're being really quiet. There was this beautiful clear sky and stars were out and the fire pit kept glowing and firing up again, you know. And there was a good 10 feet you could see around the fire pit. I mean, I could clearly see the picnic table, the tent, and the rock wall that was closest to us. Well, my husband, who was sound asleep, he woke up from that sound, but he was too sick to move. He said, "Hey, what was that?" And we said, "I don't know. I think it's coyotes." So I laid down on the back seat with my head towards the pup tent side, you know. I laid down and my brother had kicked back on the front passenger seat up front and we were just resting and I was just laying there thinking, oh boy, what an adventure, you know. I'm just about to try to go to sleep. My head pretty much touching the van wall. And maybe 10 minutes had gone by. It's hard to remember, but, you know, a while had gone by because I was relaxed. I was laying there, and everybody was laying there. It was quiet. And all of a sudden, a huge bang hit the side of the van where my head was laying. And that's like saying the huge bang. It's the only way I can describe it. That's like saying throwing a softball. If King Kong could throw a softball from about 20 feet away really, really, really hard and hit the van with it, that's what it sounded like. It was immense. It was frightening. There was no way our brains could paint the picture of what just happened. I mean, my brothers sat bolt upright. I sat upright. The kids just moved around. They didn't even wake up. My husband was kind of sitting up. He started trying to sit up and said, "What is that?" And I said, "I have no idea." And it was so loud that the sound was still reverberating, you know. It was just like, but I knew exactly where it hit because my head was right there and it was right there. And it sounded like something as big as my head hit the wall there. We just sat up and we looked everywhere. We couldn't see a thing. And of course the fire had kind of gone down at that point, so it was really dark, and we were looking around. We couldn't see anything. I mean, we just kind of sat up and then ducked down, because we thought, if something hits the side of the car, you look out and then you get down because you think something more might be coming. So we were ducked down, and then my brother peeked up, and he looked out the rear view mirror of the van, and he saw movement. And he turned his head and looked out the back window, and so, when you see that, you instinctively look the way the person's looking. So I looked out the back window with my head barely peeking up over that seat. And we both were looking out the back window. He says, something's moving, and I looked out there, and all I could tell you was there was this very large, shadowy figure. It went past us really fast, behind the van, and I think it was about 15 or 20 feet away. So at the edge of the road, where the road ended, edged over towards the apex of that horseshoe ridge. And I could tell it dropped down. It was going down the hill to the road where that other campsite was. And the baby started stirring and kind of waking up, and I was just like, oh, don't wake up now, don't wake up now. I was just tending to him and getting him to sleep, and my brother was just straining to see. He said, did you see what it was? I said, nothing but a big black mass went by. He said, do you think it was a bear? And I said, it probably was, because it was really, it was just really black mass went, and it was so fast that you couldn't make out anything. A big black shadow went by. And so now my husband got up, and he was out of the sleeping bags, and after about 10 minutes, he and my brother got out. They said they were going to check the side of the van for a dent. And I said, yeah, I think it's gone now, so be really, really careful. And so they eased out, and they looked at the side of the van. They looked everywhere on that side, and there was not one dent. I mean, miraculously, you could not tell anything had happened. And we're all just like, I'm like, well, look above. Well, look to the next side. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was closer to the wheel, and they were looking and looking, were whispering. They were right up on it with a flashlight, and there was no dent in that van. And we were just like, wow, And so they came back to get into the front seats. And, my husband his adrenaline kicked in, so he was sitting he got up in the driver's seat, my brother got in the passenger seat, and they very quietly were moving towards the front seat at this time, and they were looking outside, and they were out there for about 5 minutes, and they didn't get into the front seats. They just had the doors open a little bit, because they were not going to wake up the babies. And all of a sudden, both of them whipped their heads toward the campsite, the people down below us in that campsite. They both just turned really, really quick, looked right down there, and I was looking at them, I was like, what? And they were looking at the people down below, and I saw flashlights on in their pop-up camper. They were awake, and they were talking loud enough for us to hear them, It wasn't a whisper. They were talking, and they were hustling around, and they're hustling around, and I saw the shadow of the guy get out with his flashlight moving around, and then we saw the dome light on their truck go on, and the tent camper kind of came down, the roof of it came down. They didn't do much, they just pulled it down, and I heard them kind of hustling to get in their truck. They got in their truck, they fired up, and they pulled out. They didn't burn rubber or anything because it was on gravel, but they made the tight turn and they headed out. That's when my husband stuck his head in the door. He opened the door and he said, let's go. We can come back tomorrow morning for the tent and stuff. So they got in the front seat. He got in the front driver's seat, and my brother got in the other seat. And I thought, let's go. I mean, maybe they had an emergency or something, or, whatever. Just because we had a bang on the wall, it could have been a rock coming off the rock wall. That's what I was picturing then. Oh, a rock came off the rock wall. Maybe it hit the roof of the camper and fell, but, it didn't seem like, let's go, middle of the night, we're going to go back in that dark on that road. And, they got in the van and they sat down and they were edged up. I mean, they had the hair on the back of their neck was definitely up after being outside. They were unusually nervous. And they got in the van and they didn't even have the door shut, I don't think, when that big sound, that big holler, that woot came from the back of the van side on that rock wall area where the brush met the rock wall. It was a good, the road was probably 14 feet wide, you know, the usual. And then from that was another 20 or 30 feet of brush and then the rock wall. And from that rock wall area was this woot whistle sound again. And it came from the back of the van. And then we could hear crackly, brushy sounds because they still had their doors mostly open and I could hear the sound. And we sat there, we froze. Oh, and by the way, we had turned off all the dome lights because we didn't want them coming on to wake up the kids, you know. So we had the dome lights all off, so we're sitting there in the dark, and the guys are just frozen. They froze. They didn't even shut the doors. They were just frozen, and they were looking back there. And all this crackly, brushy sound was happening back there, and I thought, oh, man, coyotes. We just sat frozen. And it moved from the fire pit side of the van around the ridge wall, heading in a direction toward that other campsite and the road. And so a moment passed, and out of the blue, I mean, just here he is, sick as can be. And so I never expected him to move this fast. But out of the blue, just poof, he hits the headlights on the van and presses on the brake lights. And I think when he pulled in forward with the stick shift, the more I thought about it now, the more I think he had put it in reverse so it wouldn't, you know, so it was kind of locked, wouldn't roll forward. And so when he hit the brake lights, I think the reverse lights came on because it lit up pretty good back there. Anyway, he hits the lights, and my brother and I did not expect this. I mean, I jumped at the light, and we could barely see in the headlight glow, because the headlights are pointing the wrong way to see what's behind us. We could see something about halfway up that ridge coming down the ridge. And the ridge was like terraced, you know, it was limestone, and it was pretty much a terrace kind of a thing. And this big, dark shadow was coming down the ridge. It was already halfway down this ridge. And it was coming towards the bottom of the horseshoe ridge right behind us. I mean, we could clearly see arms moving, but you couldn't see detail. You could see arms moving and legs moving and coming down. And as it got down further, you could see more, and it was a 6 to 7 foot. It's hard to tell because it was bent forward, kind of using its arms and grabbing brush as it came down. But I'd say 6 or 7 feet tall. It looked like an NBA basketball player in its proportions, you know, long. And it was, you could see the hair on it glistening. It had silver-tipped hair. The hair at the ends was glistening, like it was wet, but it wasn't wet all over. It was just these little silver tips on the end of the hair were kind of sparkly in the light. And it had a gray, silvery, lighter color strip of fur that went down its back and shoulders. So you could see the shoulder. It gave you a delineation of where the back and shoulders were because you could see the light off of it. And it was standing upright like a man. It would step down, then rocks would come falling down, and then it would bend down and grab some branches and step down some more, and then stood up and walked a bit and kept doing this up and down. And I could see by that time that it had the head, and it was looking left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. It was looking at us, and then it would look down to see where it's going, and looking at us, really twitchy. But it was moving pretty quick as it got near the bottom. And I would say the fur looked like German Shepherd fur. It stuck out from the body a bit, you know. It was bristly. And it laid down, the fur laid down. It had that light color tips to it that really glistened in the light. it was like a man. It was shaped like a man. And it had, I would say, 2 inches or 4-inch long fur at the head. And I couldn't tell. It was really dark. I couldn't see a neck, but I could see this long arms because he kept grabbing the brush really far out in front of him to support itself on the way down. And his arm hair seemed short. You know how people say sometimes when they see a Bigfoot it had flowing hair? There was no flowing hair. This hair was close cropped to the body. And I only got really quick glimpses of the face out that back window of the van because he was twitchy. He was looking at us, looking away, looking at us, looking away, and I was straining to see. But we had limited light. But the guys had their heads like out the door. I mean, they were looking out the door at this point. And they saw it really clearly. I saw the head shape, I saw the ears, I saw the tufty hair, and I saw the balder face, and I saw the shape of the nose, which was flatter and more blunt than a human nose, and it had a snout that stuck out. Not a lot, not like a dog's, you know, not like a German Shepherd dog's would stick out, but the snout was the closest I can say, and it was told to me by someone else when I told this story, was it more like a baboon? And that really, definitely, yeah, it was more like a baboon face. But really short and boxy, this nose was. And, the body hair was definitely dark. And as the hair grew out from the body, it seems like it became silver-tipped. And this silvery streak at the shoulders and down the spine delineated it really well. I mean, you could see the shoulders, you could see the muscles moving and so forth, but there was no tail. Absolutely, you could tell there was no tail. By the time it reached the bottom of the rock wall, it was in brush by that time, but just before it stepped down in the brush, you could see the backside, you could see definite buttocks and no tail. And it had to be over 6 feet tall. And the strange thing is, when it stepped down in the bush, turned toward us a little bit, I couldn't see its eyes and its face very well, but I could see that the eyes glinted definite red. I saw 2 piercing red pinpoints right there, not bigger than pinpoints, but it looked at us, and that red, I felt like it looked right through us. I could see those red eyes. The light had made it like a dark brown, but red glint at us. And I just got, talk about the hair on the back of your neck. I got chills when it looked at, because my brain could not paint the picture of what this was. It was not a bear. It wasn't a human. It definitely wasn't a coyote. And I was looking at it, and my mind was just racing as, what the heck is this? But to describe it, its physique, it was like an NBA player that had just a buff body, except its chest was puffed out from the shoulders to the, mid-arm area. It came out like a dog's, if you know what I mean. And then it went down and tapered in to the waist. So it had this barrel chest. It was a very, very, very odd physique. It had this defined barrel chest. And then it went down to legs that were not crooked like a dog's legs. They were human-looking legs. I remember seeing the calf muscles. I didn't see the feet. I definitely saw the arms and the hands, and they were fingers. They were not paws. Because he was grabbing brush, and I could see the finger flecks. It was really odd. Even though we were in low light, you could see this glint so well, and you could see he had fingers. And it wasn't an ape face or a monkey face, but like I said, I couldn't see the delineation well, but my brother and my husband did, and later when we were talking, we were trying to say they saw the face, and they gave me the descriptions of the face. And so I did a couple of drawings of what we saw, and I filled in the face according to their dimensions and their accurate descriptions. So the face is not mine. Anything but the shape of the nose and the redness of the eyes, that's what I saw. But the other strange thing was when it got down to the bottom and it was making these twitching left, right, looking around, it kept looking to the left and to the right. And now that I look back, I think maybe it was looking that maybe there was another one there, that maybe he wasn't alone, because he was very, very much looking to the left and then way over to the right, and the left and way over to the right, and he didn't really look at us that often. And when he did, I just saw that horrible red glow, evil-looking eyes. And he had tufts of hair at the top of his ears, and I remember that because of the twitching, and the top of the ears had tufts on it like lynx, and the ears were not up like a German Shepherd's. They were on the side of the head, definitely. And then they had these little tufts of hair like a lynx, and the tufts of hair had white or silver at the end. And so you could definitely see them glinting as he turned. He had these tufts of hair up there, which I think if he wasn't as close as he was, if he was farther away, I might have thought those ears were pointed like a German Shepherd's. But they were not up on top of his head. They were on the side of his head. So if you can imagine seeing this crazy animal and feeling definitely threatened, and those horrible red eyes, and your mind trying to make it fit into a category, you're just going, what? But the whole time you're thinking, I think we should leave now. I mean, you had that flight or fright thing that said, let's go. Anyway, we saw it just long enough to get down to the brush and stand there looking left or right, and I have no idea if the guys had talked about this before or anything, but they both at the same time jumped out of the van. They swung the doors open and stood outside the van, and my brother ran around the front of the van in the headlights to get to the driver's side so he could see this thing better. And my husband backed up. He squatted down they pushed the door mostly shut, and he squatted down. My brother got beside him, so he wouldn't block the headlights so he could see back there. And I'm just like, what? They got out of the car. And, they were cowered down by the front van driver's door side, and they were looking and looking, and it went along the ridge. They kept low and followed, it with their heads, and it went along the ridge over towards the other person's campsite, just kind of walked in the brush back there. And we lost sight of it. It went into the brush and the dark, and there was nothing, and the guys were just crouched down there, and I was just like, my heart stopped. I didn't know what to expect next. And at that moment, a shower of gravel and rocks came at the driver's side door of the van. And I'm telling you, a shower isn't the word for it. It's like you took, like a small laundry basket full or 2 buckets full, of road gravel. And all at once, you were able to hurl the contents, shot out like a cannon. I can't even begin to explain how that rock came from the brush in the dark back there, and the amount of rock. It shot out like a spray of water, and it hit their heads and all over, like a pinpoint, the driver's side door and the tops of the 2 guys. And it just showered down on them. It didn't come hard enough like where it would hurt them, but it shot straight across. I remember seeing it go straight across right at them. And it just made a horrible sound like pounding rain. And the guys jumped in the van. My husband jumped in the driver's seat. My brother ran around, got in the passenger seat, shut the doors. I covered up the kids' heads, covered their ears, and we were watching the windows and just trying to see what I was again trying to figure out what. And then my mind said, oh, it's a shower of rock that came off the rock wall. That has to be it. And we're all shaking, and my husband's up there, he's just sick. And we're all shaking. I said, do you think that rock came off the rock wall? And they just shook their heads, no. And they were just sitting there, and they started shaking. I asked the guys, I said, what are you thinking? What are you thinking when you got out of the van? And they said, well, we saw it. We saw it turn, and we thought it was a guy. They saw it pretty clearly just before he headed off into the dust. They thought it was a guy, and they were going to go over there and harass him for scaring us. Are you kidding me? That's why I told the story about the people being angry about this valley being flooded. And so I think in the backs of their minds, when they were trying to make a story out of this thing in their head to make it right, when it stood up and walked away, they thought, oh, it's one of those guys that was angry about the campsite being opened. It's a guy, and he's trying to scare away the campers. He wants everything to go back the way it was. You know, that kind of feel. That's what they thought. That's what they said they thought. It's a guy. He's trying to scare us out of our campsite. But when that shower of rocks hit, there was no explaining that. And this whole thing, you know, the whole thing was just minutes. I mean, it was like boom, 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 one thing after another. Well, my husband got so ill, and he was shaking so bad, he said, we're going, and he fired up the van, we backed up, we went down that road, and he was so sick. I said, let me drive, and he was just like, we don't want to stop, and we went you couldn't go very fast because you couldn't see anything, you couldn't tell. This was a newly gravelled road, so you know how new gravel is, you kind of sink in it, and you know, he was just driving very slowly, and I thought, well, that thing could catch us if we're going this slow. Oh, let me drive. But we drove, and we knew the way to Rogers, that city, so we went our way, and about, I guess half the way we were just babbling. What'd you see? What'd you hear? What did you see? What does the face look like? And my brother said, oh, it's a deformed animal. It's a bear with deformities. And he kept saying, or it was, you know, it's a big German shepherd. It had really severe deformities. That's what it was. And I was dealing with the babies because now they're up and they're crying. And I was dealing with them, and we were going back and forth. We were all freaking out. We were just shaking. I mean, I had no doubt if we stayed there was going to be an attack. I mean, just instinctually, everything. It was like, here we are. We've got a sick person, a very weak sick person in the car. We have 2 infants in the car. There's 2 able-bodied people who are shaken to their wits' end. And we're in a cul-de-sac, facing forward in a cul-de-sac. If many somethings wanted to attack us, I mean, they had chosen their prey because there's 2 babies, a sick man. I mean, we were just sitting ducks. And I'm starting to think that, and I'm telling the guys, you know, oh my gosh, you know, and we were just sitting ducks, you know, we should have backed in, and they were saying, well, you don't expect to be attacked. And we finally got to the main road, and we got to this it was a little mom and pop store, a white clapboard store with a tiny little street light and a parking lot for about 6 cars. We pulled in there, and it had to be after midnight. We pulled in there and parked and shut everything down, and my husband just kind of fell apart. He started sweating and shaking, and we had to get him in the back of the van and wrap him in blankets, and we sat under that street light. That was where we were going to be for the rest of the night. That was it. And we waited. Nobody slept. He slept. He passed out. He was done in. But my brother and I sat, and we were like, so do you think it's, and I'm like, Bruce, it's not a German Shepherd. That was not a German Shepherd, you know, and he's like, it had to be a deformed animal or whatever, and I said, a 7-foot-tall deformed German Shepherd? No, you know, we're talking back and forth. So a couple of people pulled in early morning, and they went to open the store, and I went in and used the bathroom and got some baby food jars and cough syrup, and and I went up to the man at the register. I mean, I must have looked like I'd just come out of war, you know. I said, I gotta ask you something. It's gonna sound kind of strange, but it's our first time camping here, and I told him about where we were camping. I said, do you have any really, really big animals here that are, like, just here and nowhere else? And they looked at me like, huh? And, you know, being young in a VW van, they probably thought I was a druggie. So I started telling them where we were from. We were camping with 2 kids and how we got spooked out of the campsite by this big animal. And, you know, I was just trying to let them know I'm not on drugs here or drunk or something. And I said, do you have a bear or something that walks upright a lot or makes this whoopee sound or, you know, has this hair characteristics? The woman wasn't doing anything. She didn't stop once. She just kept dusting the cans and straightening up the shelves. The man said, no, I think the bears here are just normal, and they're like bears everywhere else. And he was just a deadpan face. I mean, if somebody came in and asked me this, I'd be going, what? But anyway, he asked where we camped, and he said, oh, it's all new, so maybe some displaced critters were the cause, you know. And he said, I do think campers and hunters have heard some crazy noises in there, like hollering. And he said, you know, that's kind of why they call them haulers. And I said, you mean the animals? He says, no, I mean the ridges and stuff. People used to holler from ridge to ridge to communicate. So, oh, I get it. Yeah, okay. No, this was a screechy, ape-whistly sound. And he was like, nah, you might ask the ranger. Tell the ranger. I'm sure if, you know, there's some reports. I think there have been reports in the paper of strange hollering, and I was like, oh, okay, fine. So we just left. We got in the van, everybody used the bathroom, and talk about when the adrenaline crash came. I mean, I decided I was going to drive home, and we left the pup tent. We were not going back there to get any camping equipment. That was it. No more, no going back. We said, well, maybe the people, when they come back for their tent camper, they can take the tent. On the way out, we stopped at the ranger's little hut, you know, and I said, we're leaving. This is that. He's really sick. You can give away our campsite. Whatever. We had a strange animal in the camp. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, well, that's too bad. Okay, well, we'll check you out of the camp. Well, we left. I mean, we were hitting the road. When we were almost home, probably 2 hours from home, hour from home, my husband woke up, and he and my brother were talking, and my brother was graduating early. He was going to go to a special veterinary school. He'd been accepted. It was hard to get in. My husband had this really good job, and they were talking back and forth, and they were like, we're not telling anybody about this. I mean, my job is on the line, my husband said. And my brother said, I'm not going to do this. They're going to say, you're nuts, or you're something wrong with you, and you're trying to get into an animal school, and you're trying to make this up so that, you know, you're some big investigator of animals or something. I don't know what he thought. But anyway, they were like, nobody. We're not telling anybody about this. We'll talk about it later, but for right now, let's just get home and everything. And they made me swear. I said, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Whatever. We'll talk about it later. So every time I would try to talk about it with my husband or my brother, they were just like, it was just a deranged animal. It was just this. It was just that. They just would not relent. They couldn't. I mean, when my husband and I would try to talk about it, he'd just start shaking. He'd just start shaking, say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't even want to think about it. It was a horrible thing. I almost died. I was, you know, maybe I was delirious. And we're just like, no, you weren't delirious. So I asked them more about the face, you know, and I would make notes, and they would talk about it for about a minute. I was like, about it. So through all the years, they to this day, my brother can't talk about it. He just freaks out. He says, I just don't know what that was. I think it was a deformed animal. I don't know. So it wasn't till years later, a couple, maybe 5 or more, I saw the Bigfoot movies and books and sightings, and there weren't a lot of pictures of Bigfoot back then, but I did see one, and I thought, you know, as dark as it was, and has, you know, amped up as we were, maybe this was a Bigfoot. I mean, it looked, the shape, you know, it could have been a Bigfoot. So I started reading and trying to see what these Bigfoot, but I always knew when I saw it, well, it's not quite right. And it has some of the attributes, but not quite right. Boy, wow. You know, it did make some sounds, some whoop. If that was it, it could have been coyotes making the whoops. The hairiness, the head shape, the size, but this thing didn't have the big, broad, huge shoulders and the thick limbs that everybody talked about. So I just kind of suppressed it. I never told anybody. I never told one person. And it was about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago. All these years later, I told my daughter about it. She's an adult. She's, you know, in her 30s. I said, you know, when your dad almost drowned and we were there, you know, well, there was more to the story. And I told her about it. And I said, I think we saw a Bigfoot. And she was like, really, you guys? No. Yeah. I said, I think we saw a Bigfoot. And the reason I'm telling you is I saw something on a video, and I think it's a really, really different creature. I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but I don't think it's a total Bigfoot. I think it's more like this dogman creature they're seeing in Wisconsin or Michigan or something. And because something had come on the news, and I saw it, and what the people said, someone said red eyes, and that made me go, what? And so I searched out as much as I could. At the time, there wasn't anything much. So I told her about it, and she said, oh, you guys, Bruce, your brother's right. He saw something that was not quite right. Maybe it was something that had mange, a bear with mange, or something that lost all of its hair. And I said, but it had these red eyes and this, I mean, it was fierce, you know, and he threw all that gravel. She says, but you don't know it threw the gravel. So, you know, I suppressed it. I thought, yeah, but still, going camping, going out in the woods, man, talk about PTSD. I mean, if I'm in a tent camping, I can hardly sleep at night. And I'm thousands of miles away from where that happened, and I still think, well, if it could happen there, I'm in deeper woods now in the Northwest, but I spoke to a person who has just loads of experience with Bigfoot, and he brought it to my attention that there are more than one type of cryptids like Bigfoot. There are several. People don't report the same figure every time. And he said, this sounds more like a dogman type. And I went, oh, you're kidding, really? Oh, my goodness. I thought dogmen were paranormal, werewolf, not flesh and blood, all this crazy stuff. And when I heard all this shapeshifter stuff, I knew this was not what I saw. We saw flesh and blood, gravel hurling animal. And after listening to the different shows, I then started to get the idea that, yeah, this is one of those. This is in that category. And now, I mean, I've never had any sightings since. Even though I live in an area where Bigfoot is sighted, this is Bigfoot country. And there's not a time I don't go out in the woods that I don't kind of look around and make sure, hey, I'm not in somebody's path, am I, you know? And, even though it was so long ago and so far away from here, it's still too horrible it's too horrible to believe. You just can't believe it happened to you. If it didn't happen to my brother and my husband also, by this time I would have pushed it right out of my head. I could have gotten rid of it. But because we all three were there, we all three know what happened. We all three, it's as if it happened to me last night. It is so ingrained in our memories, in our head. Definitely, there's PTSD here. It's craziness. You walk into, you hear PTSD where a soldier is at home now and he hears a loud explosion, he hits the ground. Well, it's the same way for me when I'm in a campsite and it's nighttime, I hit the ground. I have to close every tent window. I cannot possibly sleep with the window open for fear that I might see those red eyes come peeking in or a shower of gravel. And I remember camping just a couple of years ago, and some people horsing around in the middle of the night came down the camp road, and we're in a remote camp area, again, where you wouldn't think anything would happen. And these people came wheeling in their four-wheeler, and they skidded in the gravel, making a big donut, and turned and left. And when that gravel hit, I woke bolt upright, looked out, saw the truck, saw them leaving, and that was enough for me. Nobody else woke up. I eased out, got in my van, and slept in the van for the rest of the night when I did get to sleep.
Of the three people that were there, Pam, without a doubt, it sounds like you coped with the stress from the encounter the best.
And it may be because I didn't really see the face that well. That's thinking about it all these years later, I didn't see that face. I saw the eyes, I saw the shape of the nose, but those guys looked right into the face.
Yeah, that would make a huge difference. Something like that that's so different than anything you would expect to see. By the way, out of curiosity, how close is that campsite to Fouke, Arkansas?
Oh, wow. I haven't ever really, I don't know. But you could look up Rogers, Arkansas, and that Corps of Engineers project, Beaver Lake, and you could probably find out. I don't know, really.
I'm going to look that up, see exactly how close it is to Fouke. I wonder if it is close, how many people from Fouke saw that thing and thought it was the beast of Boggy Creek. If maybe that might be what people were seeing back then. Who knows?
Well, one thing is, having seen the movie and so forth, that thing was definitely on the offense. I mean, it wasn't quiet Bigfoot peeking in your window running away. That thing, isn't that the one where it attacked the guy who went out on his porch?
That's it. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was imminent attack. You felt imminent attack. This was after the gravel throwing. It was like, okay, that's it. And I'm telling you, anyone who's ever faced a wild animal or a bad situation, you get a feeling, you get an adrenaline rush. You get a body rush that says something's not right here. We all had that. I could have jumped out and lifted that Volkswagen van and tipped it over if my kid was under it. That kind of feeling. And the crash from all that adrenaline, when we got to that little store under that yard light, the crash was incredible. I'm telling you, there was nothing like it, and it was a primal fear that came over us.
Speaking of that area, Pam, have you heard of any incidents happening there after your encounter happened?
No, we just, I never went back to Arkansas. We never went back to Arkansas. We were transferred right after that. And so I lost contact with anyone in the area, and I don't really remember hearing anything, nothing, not a thing. And there could be a bazillion reports by now, because that area has been populated and open for a long time. But no, I never did look into that area or anything about it. Not at all. no curiosity about it at all. And a side point is that, you know, of course this has piqued my interest over the years. Every time I hear the word Bigfoot, I look at it and say, that's not quite it. I mean, I listen to the radio shows. I'm in this search, kind of, to find out where this animal fits, so I can say, aha. And until I recently heard on these radio shows was the first aha moment that I finally went, okay, I'm not the only one. And the difference between most Bigfoot experiencers or encounters or whatever, they see one and they're like, wow, I want to see it again. I'm going to go on a Bigfoot hunt. I'm going to go find Bigfoot. I'm going to attend seminars. I'm going to go out in the woods. I'm going to knock on wood. I'm going to holler. I really don't hear anybody who says, oh, I saw a dogman, werewolf, this beast, say, oh, yeah, let's go back to Arkansas and park in that same spot, and let's have some infants and a sick man with us. Let's roast some hot dogs, and let's hope that we get a gravel shower and some red-eyed beasts to come out here and play flutes for it. I mean, that is not going to happen. And I've listened to your show, and the first guy, he everything he said was, I could say yes, my head was nodding. No, I'll never go back there. No, I have no interest in finding one of these things. If I was in a helicopter and I happened to, there's one, let's take some good pictures, whatever, throw a net. Yeah, but anyone who has this experience in their right mind isn't going to go out there and say, oh yeah, I want to touch the cobra.
I definitely agree. I do not advocate going out looking for these things. There's a reason why car crashes are not studied from inside the car. They're always studied from a distance. I think that applies in this case as well. By the way, Pam, also, since you got to see its hands pretty well, you said, did you have a chance to notice if it had claws or nails?
No, I couldn't see any detail like that. I just saw basically the distance between fingers. You know, I saw black appendages that were grabbing, and the only thing I could say is that I could see the blackness of the fingers outlined on the reflection of bushes. So I could tell there were fingers and not a paw.
Through all of that encounter, did you ever smell anything?
No, it was a total clear, wonderful evening. We had, van windows open, whatever, and there was nothing, not a thing that set us off. There was no smell, not a thing, nothing.
Well, in closing, you mentioned the pictures that you sketched. I'm going to have those posted on my website, dogmanencounters.com. Also, I'll have those posted on the show page of dogmanencountersradio.com. For anyone that would like to take a look at them, that's where you can find them. Looking at these pictures, you did a wonderful job. That really paints one heck of a picture of something I definitely wouldn't want to run into in the middle of the night. I'll tell you what.
No. It was a harrowing experience, and not one I ever care to relive. Not at all.
Oh, I don't think anyone can blame you, that's for sure. Sounds like one heck of a night, Pam. At this point, I want to thank you so much for coming on, sharing that wonderful story, doing such a great job of sharing it, too. I really do appreciate it.
Well, I hope I wasn't too long-winded, and I apologize to the audience, but it is, and that's part of the PTSD of it. It seems like once you start relating this thing, it's like the adrenaline comes back, and you just start babbling, and until you get all the way done, you just can't, it's like, I just got to get it all out. And the first time I related this to a listening audience, I told the host that I felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. And the fact that there's other people out there who've experienced this, I mean, I wish they would come forward and just tell us your encounter, because the rest of us will feel a whole lot better.
Well, you definitely were not long-winded. You did a great job of sharing that story. Thanks again so much for coming on and sharing those details with us. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. You are very welcome, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Oh, anytime at all. Don't be a stranger, okay?
Okay, I'll be listening, and I'll be watching the site.
I appreciate it. I really do. Well, thanks again and have a great night.
Okay, good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.